Welcome to Master Talks from WeDesign. My guest this week is Claire Kells from the United Nations Global Compact. Now, the UN is engaged in every country in the world, and so they can help you in ways you could not believe. You're going to really enjoy this conversation because Claire gives you concrete ideas for how you can embrace sustainability for a more profitable future. Welcome to Master Talks from WeDesign. My guest this week is Claire Kells from the United Nations Global Compact. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Simon.
So I'm thrilled to see you. Let's start by telling everybody what on earth is the United Nations Global Compact.
Happy to. So the UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. We've been around since the year 2000, and we've grown to over 10,000 companies globally around the world. We're present in, I believe, over 150 countries around the world. Those companies have made a CEO-level commitment to upholding the norms and values of the United Nations throughout their strategy and operations.
So why is it not fixed?
So that's a great question. And I think what we're seeing in the data is showing is that companies are aware of the issues and making these commitments, but translating into action can be really challenging, especially throughout the supply chain. As supply chains grow more complex, that's one issue, and also as the challenges are cross-sectoral, so more collaboration and more ambitious action is needed from companies.
Okay. I suspect you hear a lot of excuses from CEOs about how hard it is and how challenging it is. Anyway, let's start by understanding what that really means. So the Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals. As you can see, I've done my homework, right? 17 goals that are all around the world of sustainability. So tell us about a few that are the most significant that people should really be aware of.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the goal on climate, which is goal 13, and the goals on reducing inequality. So there's one on gender equality, and then reducing inequalities around the world between countries are some of the top ones that can really have positive impacts on a lot of the other goals as well.
And I know when I've seen these in the past, when I've looked at them, they've always struck me as things we should be doing anyway.
Yes.
Like at what point was it not okay to do those things?
Never.
Yes, exactly. But I know through industrialization that certain countries have progressed quicker, shall we say. But if I look at them now, it's hard for me to imagine a company that would say, well, I'm not going to do that one. I'm not going to do that one. So, I get the sense that everyone's like, yes, we'll do that. We're working on that one now. We'll get to that one next. But that feels a little bit convenient that they can say that, So in the spirit of positive engagement, can you tell me a little bit about some companies that are doing a really good job with some of them that might serve as an example?
Yeah. One good example recently that I've interacted with from the fashion and apparel textile space is Artistic Milliners. They're a denim mill based in Pakistan, and they've done a really thorough job of looking at all of their impacts throughout their value chain and their supply chain, both positive and negative, and aligned those impacts to the Sustainable Development Goals. So that helps give a shape and a higher purpose to their overall sustainability strategy, and it allows them also to work with partners.
So, do you think it's possible to reach these goals without government support?
No, every sector of society needs to take action. Governments, individuals, companies, civil society, everyone needs to do their part.
Because I spend a lot of time in China where many of our viewers are, and I look at some of the positive things that are happening there. And it comes frankly from a very strong government directive, like today we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. And that makes a big impact.
Yes.
Other countries, not so much. The United States, where we are right now, not a big passion about sustainability right now from the government.
Indeed.
But I have to wonder whether corporations, because they're global, really care. Because you can compel them to do it in one country, but since they're thinking globally, it's like lead-free gasoline. It may or may not have been required in any given country, but they did it across the board because they had to, because they didn't want to make one kind of engine.
Right.
So I wonder, though, whether these days, whether corporations have a bit more clout than governments.
I think there's important roles for both governments and corporations to play, but I think corporations can indeed have those global impacts given that they have supply chains and value chains in so many different markets and geographies. And I think also the the stakeholders of corporations are also global and different from governments. So corporations have investors, and we're seeing strong market signals that sustainability is good for business, and as well as global consumers are demanding sustainability as well.
Yeah, well, I think when you look at Larry Fink and the statements he's made
Exactly.
to his shareholders saying, listen, if you don't embrace sustainability or climate change, then guess what? You're out.
Exactly.
You can't get away from that.
Indeed.
So listen, I forgot at the beginning of the conversation, I always want to know where you come from, but I'm so excited about what you do here. I got a bit carried away. So let's just go back for a moment. What are you doing here? How did you end up here, Claire? Is this what you planned to do when you were at school?
Honestly, it was. I have always been passionate about international affairs. I can recall being just fascinated as a child by the fall of the Berlin Wall, the first democratic elections in South Africa. So I always wanted to be connected to global issues. And I made my way to New York and went to grad school, and was privileged and lucky enough to end up at the UN Global Compact. And I've been here 10 years now. So
wow, that's fantastic. Half his life.
Indeed.
That's wonderful. So I touched on the US, and we can't get away from the fact that the US is not really embracing any action against climate change. Have you noticed much change since the US withdrew from the Paris Accord?
From businesses, absolutely. I think there's been a realization among business that when if government is unwilling to take action, then business has a leadership opportunity and a responsibility as well. So we've absolutely seen more action from companies, especially in the area of science-based targets. It's a very rigorous framework for companies to reduce their carbon emissions in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. And we're working now to mobilize companies who have made that commitment to then push regulators and policymakers to also take action. So hopefully it has a positive...
I know we're pushing them or dragging them along saying catch up.
Right. Either way, a virtuous feedback loop.
So I remember, I don't know who said it first, but I find it very instructive. It used to be, hundreds of years ago, the biggest building in the town was religious. And then after a while, the biggest building became governmental. And now, of course, it's corporate. And to me, that's a very smart analogy of what's going on now. My personal vision is I'm not sure we're going to get much help from the government, any government. And so, but I'm okay with that, because the corporations don't rely on the government. They can be compelled to do something, but they're not really relying on them to do good. So any other companies that you think are having a global impact? Like I work with H&M, and I really admire their attitudes. I don't know that they're the solution, but they're definitely engaging.
Yeah.
That's important. Adidas are doing a great job with Parley for the Oceans.
Exactly.
And that's a significant part of their business. That's not just, like playing a little bit to make a press announcement.
Yeah. So I think the interesting thing about H&M, as your audience may know, their former head of sustainability is now the CEO. So I think that's an interesting move, and I believe that's the first head of sustainability who was promoted to a CEO role. So I think that's a interesting trend, or hopefully will become more of a trend. I think also some companies in the US, Patagonia, Eileen Fisher are always great leaders. Again, maybe a little bit more in the denim space. Levi's is doing some great work. They've been participating in the UN Global Compact for many years, especially in the water space. I think that's a really important space for companies in the fashion, apparel, textile industry to be in. I mentioned science-based targets, which is a way to for companies to reduce their carbon emissions in line with science. I think the next frontier of this science-based framework is water. So how can companies make water stewardship in line with a particular water basin? There's some interesting work being done around there, and Levi's has been part of that for many years.
Well, I think what's instructive there is Levi's is not a high-end brand. It's a high-prestige brand, but it's not a high-end, expensive brand. And they're embracing sustainability and making lots of money doing it. And that's the critical thing. If we want corporations to be sustainable, they've got to make more money doing it, otherwise they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
They can't. They're not allowed to. So if you were thinking about fashion, I know you cover all industries, but if you were thinking about the textile and fashion industry, what would be some of the SDGs that you think that you would really like them to embrace?
Absolutely.
Maybe they're not doing the best job at yet.
Well, I think one of the SDGs that we see a lot of fashion and apparel industry companies gravitate to at first is SDG 12, which is responsible production and consumption. So that gets really to the heart of the business. Not only how they make their products, but also looking end to end how those products are being used by consumers, and do they have a second life or a circular life, right? So the circular economy comes into play there. And so I think SDG 12 is a great starting point for companies in this industry.
I think from what I've seen as well, taking care of people. We're all familiar with the Rana Plaza disaster and many others like that, and the way that people continue to be exploited. And I've got to believe that the consumer doesn't want that. It's one thing for them to remain blind. We all do to a degree, frankly. But the minute you know, then you know. You can't unknow.
Exactly.
Are you seeing any movement on that around the world?
I think so, yes. And in fact, there's a very local indie designer based here in New York called, I believe it's Brave Gentleman. The designer there made a really good point that if there was a way for our values of eradicating modern slavery and having sustainable clothes, that we could show that in the clothes we wear and be proud to have that visibly shown every day in the clothes that we put on every day, then that would really change the consumer mindset. So I think that's an interesting way for designers to start thinking about this. How can the clothes themselves have a visual representation of our values? And then also, I think there's some great work being done by also other UN partners, like the International Labour Organization and their Better Work initiative. And then to showcase the UN Global Compact tool, we recently launched something called the Decent Work and Sustainable Procurement Toolkit. So it's a toolkit for procurement officers to use to have those conversations with their vendors and suppliers about these issues. And also for those procurement officers to work with their colleagues to have those conversations when often they're subject to cost pressures. So how can they have a conversation with other colleagues about the total cost of these issues across the business?
I love all that. I'm a very skeptical person. And I can't believe you're not to a degree as well. Just because the reality is, when someone sits in a room with you, if they're the CEO and they say, this is great, we must do this, and they look at their people and say, I really want to do this. And the next day they're in the room with their accountants. Their accountant's like, yeah, money's not so good. That's what they just said to you is not going to be top of mind. And I see people in companies at medium to higher levels, but because they're not the boss, they've still got to deliver the numbers.
Yeah.
How do we address that with a corporation?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of areas. So like I said, signals from the market are becoming stronger. So
Yes.
I think and in fact, data is showing that currently about $1 in 4 US dollars in the investment world is in sort of sustainable investments.
That's very important to hear that though. 1 in 4 US dollars in investment is in sustainable investment. So if you want investment from the US, which is quite a big investor, then you need to be thinking about that.
Exactly. And that's set to grow by 20 times over the next 10 years. So it's big and it's going to be growing.
Well, but
so
1 in 4 times 20 is like 400%, right?
Exactly. So huge opportunity space. And in fact, the Better Business, Better World report that came out right when the Sustainable Development Goals were being launched estimated that there's about $12 trillion in the opportunities to create new products, new services, new business models that help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's huge opportunity there.
So, and what's the opportunity in being not sustainable? I mean, seriously, because this is it, right? I talk to people in companies and they're like, well, I'd love to do this, but my boss is just not going to have it. And my answer is always, well, then look for another job because this company's not going to be around.
Exactly.
But hearing that from you, I mean, I say that and people think, well, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But
well, I think there's risk management, right? I mean, climate change risk, that's what's driving a lot of the interest from investors, is that's becoming a very material risk now to companies' bottom line. I think there's also employee engagement and retention, right? Young employees don't want to work for companies that don't have a purpose or a positive impact in the world. And then I think also consumers, there is data showing that some consumers will pay more for more sustainable and ethical goods. And I think also it's about being future fit as a business. I think it's John Elkington from the Breakthrough Innovation Project who said that to be future fit, 70% of businesses will have to radically transform their business model. So it's how they're doing business. What products and services are they creating, and how are they selling and delivering those? All require some serious innovation and transformation to be a truly sustainable business, which means you'll be still around in 50, 100 years.
Yeah. I mean, there are parallels, I think, in other industries like Netflix versus Blockbuster. Bless them, Blockbuster, loads of stories from the video stores, but there aren't any anymore. Whereas Netflix are like, whoosh.
Yeah, innovation.
Yeah, and so I mean, when I think about the fashion industry, I'm both excited because I think it can be a very quick to evolve industry, but I'm also, we're doing it the same way we were 150 years ago. Some of the same machines we're still using.
Exactly.
You know, and we're still growing crops, making fabric, sewing it up, shipping it, selling it in stores. You know, we sell a lot online, but that's the only bit that's slightly different. Are you seeing anything around the world that challenges that?
Yes, I think there's some interesting work being done in material innovation. Bolt threads, you might be familiar with. They are creating threads from, I think it's spider silk, or unique ways of creating new threads. Where I think mushroom and mycelium products. And textiles made from pineapple waste. There's some really interesting work being done in material innovation, and I think that's also an interesting space for like social impact investing and sort of innovation funds to invest in there. Could be really good so that we can scale those up and have them be available at the scale that's needed.
Well, that's what they're looking for as well. You know, they really are. Like I'm lucky enough to host the pitch stage at the Copenhagen Global Summit, and so I see one after another these new companies making any kind of fabric from any kind of vegetable, and it's fantastic. You know, my favorite, actually the one that won, was Nature Coatings, which make black dye from wood pulp. So instead of putting it into landfill, the wood pulp, they make black dye, which of course is therefore non-toxic and natural, and black dye is 60% of all dye apparently.
Right, fascinating.
So I think that there's several messages there that I want to stress, which is, you know, if you want to have a business in the future and you want investment, think about sustainability. If you have any interest in hiring decent people, think about sustainability. And if you want your customers to ever stick with you, think about sustainability.
Exactly.
And when I asked about the future of non-sustainable businesses, I just don't understand how people don't understand.
Yeah.
And there are huge companies that definitely don't.
I think they do understand. And maybe they're betting at the moment that they can sort of get by. But I think the market and the investors and the pressures from regulators, policymakers, and consumers are going to outpace that sort of old thinking. So I think those companies who think they know the right way to do smart business and they're not doing it, I think they might still be able to get away with it, but that's changing.
I mean, I have to say, and this is terribly cynical, but I find the sad reality with some of those businesses is there are people running it who've got their eye on 3 or 4 years ahead, and then they're like, well, you know, I'm good. So listen, on the positive side, how can you help? So there are people who are watching this and they've got big businesses and they're like, all right, I get it. Like, shut up, I get it. Sorry. But so how can you help? I mean, I'd love to know how they can engage with what you're doing, what they can learn, and you know, how we can go forwards.
Sure. So the UN Global Compact exists with all of the programming and tools and resources that we create are designed to help companies take practical actions on sustainability. So, you know, if companies want to join up and make that commitment and align their strategy with the Sustainable Development Goals to have that positive impact, you know, we're open and we'd like to talk to them. And we also have a number of tools and resources on our website. As well, we also, you know, for your audience in China, we have a China operations office. So happy to, you know, make those connections as well. But I think get involved and use the tools and resources that are available.
I think that's very important, actually, because the message there, we often talk about sustainability. You can't do it on your own. You've got to engage with people that want to help. And if there's anyone who wants to help more than you, I've never met them. I mean, that's the key. You've got to engage with your organization. And it's not like you have to walk through the door and say, right, you're sustainable. That's not it at all.
Exactly.
You know, you've got to meet people where they are, and that's clearly what you do.
We're absolutely an inclusive business initiative, and we want to work with companies on that journey and help them you know, understand the opportunity and how they can, you know, have that positive impact and minimize their negative impact. And we're exactly here to help them on that journey.
You know, I think that there's a certain knee-jerk reaction when people think about sustainability, particularly in places where it's underreported, and it's a shame, because the reality of it is if you engage with Claire's organization, you'll meet people who are also on the same journey, and they could well be your clients.
Exactly.
You know, they could be suppliers. You'll find out that actually you may be more sustainable than you realize, because sustainability is a terrible word, responsibility is a pretty good word, efficiency is a pretty good word. So if you're both efficient and responsible, chances are you've got quite a lot to say for yourself already.
Exactly, and I think sometimes it's helping companies who are doing this good work communicate and tell what they're doing. And I think the great thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is it provides this amazing, inspiring framework to help companies tell their sustainability story and connect to their partners, their suppliers, their investors, their consumers about what they're doing and what they can do more. So it also helps understand, where you are as a company now, but where you want to be as well in the future.
So Claire, tell me about, so if someone's watching this and they think, all right, I get it. I think I'm more sustainable than I realize. I definitely believe in it. I want to find out what it means to me. What would the experience be like? If they get in touch with your office or your China office, what happens?
Yeah. Well, we'd love to just talk and learn about what the company is doing, and then that helps us connect the company to some of the tools and resources that we've already developed, but also connect them to the partners that we already work with in their sector and their geography. Start inviting them to events and activities, workshops. So I think a conversation is a good place to start. But of course, our website and digital platforms are there for self-service as well.
Yeah, because there's a wealth of information online. And what's so wonderful about the UN is you're everywhere.
Yes.
You're literally everywhere. You have the biggest voice in around the world. So, it could be someone's doing something in China and they have someone else is doing it in Greece or in Turkey or something. And there's a lot that can be gained from that. I can't help but reference what's happening right now with the virus. And, when we're listening to this, hopefully that will all be taken care of. But today in New York, we're closing down. Yep. And I noticed that a group of Chinese experts had just arrived in Italy with a bunch of equipment and testing equipment and everything else, because China's got it under control and Italy needs some help.
Exactly.
Sadly, we're not doing that here in America. We've got a very different approach, which is, block your ears. But I compare that to our sustainability mission, and I think people want to help.
Yes.
They do. I'm sure there are people in Italy and people, that want to go to China or engage with China, because China has a massive impact.
Absolutely.
On what's going on. And I was thrilled to see at the Global Accord on Sustainability, there were two very large Chinese companies involved. I know that many more wanted to get involved. The challenge seems to be letting them know about it.
Well, so hopefully through our China office, we can reach out to more companies. I will say we're also, if I'm allowed to plug an upcoming activity, we are hopefully we're planning to run a webinar on climate change and health and what companies can do. In Mandarin, in Chinese, we have experts from WHO, WWF, from the China Chamber of International Commerce. So it's going to be a great webinar, and I think that's a good example of how companies can learn, the impacts to human health from climate change, and then what companies can do. So that's just something to flag for listeners who might be interested to
No, I mean, this is all about providing resources to people. So, I'm thrilled that they would know about that. And any of the other initiatives that you think might be relevant in particular to our viewers in China.
Yeah. So I think, within the UN Global Compact, we work on a number of different issues from climate to water, decent work in global supply chains. We have an action platform on sustainable oceans. We have a working group on reporting. So, companies who are doing this work, how do they tell that story in sort of a way that is consistent with global norms? So, reporting on the SDGs. So, we have a lot of work that we do ourselves, but we partner with organizations as well. So, with other UN partners, the International Labour Organization, and other civil society organizations in China, like the China Chamber of International Commerce and other partners. So
yeah. And I really want to emphasize here the fact that this is about helping, not about pointing the finger. Because not everyone's going to fix everything right away. They're not. But everyone's doing something.
Exactly.
And if you have a company of whatever size and you want to identify where you're doing a good job, maybe look for friends at other companies that might be able to help you, maybe improve. That would be nice too. But you need to engage. And it's not about going into your company and saying, what are you doing wrong here? That won't work.
Exactly.
It's the opposite.
Yeah, that's not our approach at all. We don't name and shame.
we
want to engage and exactly help companies understand what their baseline, what they're doing now, and then identify steps for having more of the positive impact that they're already having, and taking steps to minimize their negative impact. So we're all about helping them with that.
And it's it's a journey. It's not today. You haven't got to be sustainable today.
Exactly.
you have any examples? Anything come to mind about specific companies? You mentioned the Pakistan denim mill, but specific companies that maybe surprised themselves with the way forwards. You know, and I was just talking to a designer this morning, and he's a very small designer, started out, and he built his company from the beginning and kept all the scraps. Just made sense, like why wouldn't you? But then he started using them, like weaving them into fabrics and using them as bindings, and it's become part of his signature. And if he wasn't using the scraps, he'd have to buy scraps to do it. It's just completely normal, and none of it looks like scraps. You know, so to me, that was a great example of someone who didn't realize they were sustainable. It's just naturally what you did.
Yeah. I think there's some interesting work being done, or interesting companies in the space of secondhand clothes or vintage clothes. So, you know, myself when I was younger, I loved going to thrift stores and the thrill of the hunt and all of that. So now to see that become, you know, a thriving business, ThreadUp, Poshmark, Rent the Runway, sort of all of these sort of circular business models, and with a strong digital platform, I think is super exciting. So I think, you know, to see more of that around the world would be fantastic.
We actually, it's funny because another one of our episodes this year is about Atelier in Repairs in LA with Mauricio Donaldi.
Yeah.
And he's obviously built a business on, I don't like the word upcycling, but it kind of is. You know, take something in and get it made into something way more interesting.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it reminds me of my mother's generation, because they repaired everything. They didn't chuck things away.
Exactly.
And it just seems like a normal thing to do. So I'm waiting for the big, so you're right, we have the Real, etc., you know, all these reselling places. But I'm waiting for the big repair and tailoring option. Like, where's the global version of that? And I bet the investment community would be all over that.
Yeah. I think there's, you know, not to give away my $1 million idea, but I think, you know, like an Uber or a Lyft, right? The sort of peer-to-peer access sort of digital platform for finding, you know, someone who can help you in your neighborhood or in your community to do those repairs. Yeah. So exciting.
Well, you know, I was the other day I was fishing through my somewhat overextended closet, and I found a jacket that I'd had a long time because I'm extremely old. And I took it to the tailor and got it retailored, and it's my favorite jacket now.
Yeah.
Because I already liked it, that's why I bought it, and now it fits me perfectly.
Exactly.
Like, there's a lesson in that.
Yeah. My brother got married last year in our grandfather's suit that he had retailored, and
Fantastic.
it looked amazing.
It's probably better made than anything you get now. No offense, everybody.
Well, and that's when I think this idea of producing perhaps less but more quality goods, because they can be repaired, and there is business opportunity for companies who create those quality goods and then maybe have additional service for repair and reuse and, you know, reshaping, you know, because the quality is there, they can do that. So I think, you know, companies who might shy away from well, you know, we sell it and then it's out of our hands, but actually take it back and make that be part of your business model in the first place.
You see that? So you get ideas from working with Claire as well.
Exactly. Huh? Right now I'm just giving away all my $1 million ideas.
Claire, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really want to encourage people to engage. So what's that? We'll put the website up on the screen, but just tell me what it is. How do they? unglobalcompact.org. And I believe our Chinese website is cn.unglobalcompact.org, but we'll make sure we'll put it on the website. Exactly, yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Claire. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Simon. What a treasure.
Thanks for watching. Now join us online and on social media with our experts so we can answer your questions directly and keep this conversation going.